All right, thank you everybody. Welcome to the Seattle Revit User Group. I'm David Diarza, your host for today, and I try to say as little as possible when I'm up here and give it to our presenters. So I'll run through a couple of things here. Just as far as our agenda, we're very happy to welcome Iris VR today as a new sponsor. And we've got a team from Iris and from GLY presenting what should be really, really cool. You've seen in past presentations, you've seen some more theoretical and academic maybe viewpoints on the whole gamut of virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, whatever you want to call it. And I think today we're going to see some practical uses on actual projects, and we've got a demo here where you can actually put on an Oculus Rift and experience some of what you're going to see. So really excited about this. Real quick, just want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors who make these meetings possible and provide you with the wonderful lunch. By the way, the desserts are all like homemade and like totally awesome. So if you haven't gotten one of the like the donut muffin hybrid whatever thing, get one. It's mixed dessert, yes. I want to give a shout out to everybody on the SeaRUG board of directors as well. We all get together and we do our best to come up with policies that'll ensure high quality of presentations for you guys. Have a couple of announcements regarding that in the next couple of meetings, so stay tuned. And lastly, before I turn it over, and I told you I was going to be very quick today, don't go anywhere after our feature presentation over here. I've got a couple of $25 Amazon gift cards that I would love to give out. If you don't know how to get on the list for being in the drawing, all you have to do is RSVP that you're coming through the meetup site. So if you have done that, your name ought to be on the little envelope that I printed this morning, and we might be pulling your name out. So without any further ado, I'm going to give a huge thank you to Iris VR and Shane. Are you going to take it first? Awesome. Well, why don't we welcome Iris VR and GLY Construction, and let's check this out. If you don't mind if I just minimize this guy over here, I'll need it at the end.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
This is just for intros. Here's this guy. Here's this guy. Great. Let me boot this up. Excellent. Great. Well, thank you guys for coming out. We're really excited to be here today. We'll start with some intros for all three of us. So, I'm Shane. I'm one of the founders of Iris VR. I, as CEO right now, am the primary emailer at the company and do a lot of coordination, but my background is architecture. So I started in that space, did a lot of BIM work, was a consultant with a lot of different companies, primarily residential architecture, and then that consulting work turned into what is Iris now. So we've been doing this for about 5 years now, since the first Oculus Rift came out way back in the day. So excited to be here.
Hello, I'm Adam Sisler, Senior Project Engineer with GLY Construction. I'm currently heading up research and development in immersive technologies to include the whole XR spectrum. Also delving into, researching AI and the potential implications for our industry, robotics, that sort of thing. Today we're going to focus on, when we get into the slides here, basically some photogrammetry and mixing reality with the Revit models.
And I'm Scott Majatich. I'm an integrated design engineer with GOY. I'm actually formerly from the architectural world. I just saw Rob walk in. I used to work with Rob a lot, so in the architecture world. And now I'm running up and doing a bunch of stuff at some of the bigger projects. And I get to basically try to test things out and break things and then see how we can implement it on job sites.
Awesome. And so I think the way we'll do this is we'll start with just a little bit of a primer on VR in the industry, and then these guys will give some sort of case studies on how they're using VR. So super excited to get into it. Cool, thanks, guys. Iris VR, we are about 30 people now in New York. We started primarily because VR is answering some very core issues in the industry. And how many people in here have tried the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive? Okay, perfect. We're like at like 80%. That's great. So a lot of you can sort of understand this naturally. Just once you try the experience, it's sort of inherent. But there's a lot of core issues that it addresses in this industry. I think probably the most obvious one that we usually start with is clients and owners don't really get plans, don't really get 2D, don't really get renderings, at least in a spatial sense. And of course, right out of the gate, VR being at 1-to-1 scale addresses that sort of inherently in its form factor. I think one that's been interesting that we've seen more recently is 3D renderings sort of inherently hide errors and mistakes. You can really curate that view exactly the way you want, and Photoshop's awesome. But VR is going to do the opposite, where for better or for worse, it's a very, very honest medium. You're going to see exactly what the model state is, and we've seen that that can really help keep people accountable, but it can also be a better read on where the project's actually at in development. I think the higher level issue that this whole industry is grappling with is rework and project delays continue to be very prevalent and an ongoing issue. And VR is not going to solve everything in this space. It is one tool. But in our research and when we've met with others, it does seem that on average about 20% of project costs are rework right now. And that led to about 170 billion in rework in poor data and miscommunication last year. So as we're looking at VR as a way to represent space and as a way to bring more people together, there is potential to drive some cost saving in this medium. And I think all of these problems can be represented in this awesome image that one of our designers found. And I don't know if Frank Lloyd actually said this, but we found it online. You can use an eraser on the drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site. And boy, it feels like VR is a way to address that as well, as if the more we can validate at 1-to-1 scale, the fewer things like this will happen. Although I think this was kind of hopeless from the start if someone built that. And I think it's also important to reiterate that VR is definitely still in its infancy. We're probably at we're not really even at the BlackBerry stage yet. If we're comparing it to mobile phones, we're probably at like the giant, briefcase size cell phone stage. And that's important because it means that the hardware is evolving very quickly. But I think it also is important to state that it still has value even in the early days. And we're seeing that even though it's a very new technology, it offers a true sense of space. That's the inherent part of the technology. And then within that, it has all of these values that we've seen sort of emerge as people start engaging with the tools. So everything from being able to bring more people into a meeting that's before you're building the building, that you can actually walk through and understand it in a collaborative setting, is a really good way to drive conversations and have a good dialogue. Also for personal work, for doing immersive design review, being able to test out your ideas before sort of committing to them, being able to go in and test out different heights and different scales is a very powerful, it's a very powerful medium to do that and test ideas. And then more recently, and one of the reasons we're working with GLY is we're seeing that there's an emerging trend towards QA, QC, and coordination. And I think that's primarily because there's a lot of visual QA and QC that can be done in a project if you're able to walk through BIM before you're out in the field and catch visual errors and catch clashes that you might not catch on a 2D screen. And all of this leads to us, as we look at usage metrics, and as we look at how AEC is engaging with VR, it does look like it's sort of the industry that's leading VR adoption. And we've been looking at a lot of gaming metrics, we've been looking at a lot of entertainment metrics, and a pretty conservative estimate is that AEC users, at least of ours, are using VR about 20 times more than gamers. And that's primarily because as we're looking at our user base and we're looking at other people in the ecosystem, that averages out to about 3 hours a week in the goggles per user, and that's a lot of time in VR, but it's because you're able to go in and experience the project together, and gamers are not even close to that. So as we talk to people like HTC and Facebook and Oculus and all the headset manufacturers, my mantra these days is you guys really got to start looking more towards architecture and construction, because it really does seem to be one of the people one of the industries at the forefront of this technology. And within our numbers, we've seen that equates to about 130,000 VR experiences created in the last year. And that number for us is very exciting to see that. It really is a global market, and it's a technology that's being used in all places. The unifying factor for folks using VR is that you have to have 3D. That's why we're at Revit User Group. An AutoCAD 2D plan is not going to be very fun in VR. You'd be looking at it on the floor. And so most of the folks we work with are pretty much have fully adopted BIM or are coordinating 3D across sort of the full project life cycle. And we're going to highlight sort of a few use cases here. Of course, we'll hand it off to GLY after this, but the spread across the industry has been really interesting for us too, where we've seen, because a whole bunch of our teams from architecture, we sort of started on the architecture side, and we saw sort of the inherent value in architecture for design work. And we just did a case study with Marmon Mock that sort of that validated that, where they were talking about being able to work with the client to test out different ideas, to get faster client approval, and to test out different sort of designed spaces and schematic design. But then we've also seen other case studies emerge with folks like Mortensen, who have been using it for more like pre-construction and VDC. To the last project they did with us, they were testing out different configurations for a climbing wall, and they essentially went into VR to look at the different visual impacts of that climbing wall and how that was going to be assembled. And then with Barton Mallow, they're using it primarily for visual QA/QC. So we've written up a lot of these case studies to start showing how the different segments of the industry are engaging with this. And with that, we're really excited to be working with GLY. They've been, I think I met Scott 5 years ago at RTC, which is now called Built, and they've been testing out a ton of these different tools. So I'll pass it off to them for talking through some of the applications of this. Oh yeah, you can just use the arrow keys there. And yeah.
Perfect. So I'm going to walk you through kind of a maybe broad overview. I'm hopeful at this point that all of you are aware of maybe obviously of VR and the integration with Revit and the kind of file type exporting, importing necessary to get into different XR experiences. So we're not going to dig too much into that. I do want to talk more about practical application from a construction management standpoint and how we're addressing these things and addressing the constant evolution and change of this technology as it is rapidly evolving. So in here, in this slide, you can see tabletop mode, immersive. Essentially, this is using some of these, like Iris VR, the one-button solution out of Revit. For me, you know, we're a general contractor. We want to build buildings. We're not trying to really figure out how to program and code and get into VR. So having a one-button solution actually makes it way more accessible. The jump to the multi-user is also, in the last couple of months, beginning to pick up steam. Sorry about that. Just showing here also different kind of graphic qualities in these first couple VR slides. Doing like an Iris VR, kind of pushing out right from Revit, you're not really going for the architectural, you know, wow, materials look like materials, you know, you have this game engine quality. You're going for what's the current state of the model, right? We just got an update. I want to review it, you know, and get an experiential review done in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever that takes to kind of walk around the model. And that actually is going to supersede the hours it would take to flip through the 2D documentation. And you're also retaining more information from the walkthrough. There's also, with the ability, with the optimizations that are happening right now and the ability to bring in more models, you're less constrained by this file type or file size limitation that has previously, maybe in the earlier days of this VR experimentation, it's evolved into turn everything on. Bring in as many models as you can. You'll still find some limits and you'll find some quality issues, but in general, what you're looking at, you can either chunk it into smaller sections like you see on the table there, that's a portion of a building, so you can bring out more content by approaching it in a systematic way. Here's an example kind of using game engine quality on the lower slide there, just showing the realism, putting the photospheres in the background for realism, and then also on the top there, just clash detection and actually starting to get into some of these functional things like, okay, Navisworks was just released for Iris. I'm ready to crack that open. I'm sure we'll kick the tires and have some emails back to Shane. But the ability to get in there and walk it and see it is going to be more powerful, I think, than just seeing a list of clashes with locations and being able to jump to that. Again, early days. I want to kind of keep going back to that. Even though this has been ongoing experimentation we've been doing for the last 3 years, really these are development kits and first-gen VR hardware, but it's picking up steam and it's becoming more robust in what you can do with this. So again, the multi-user, I just want to point out that's Scott over there. We've been doing a lot of testing with kind of the multi-user between job sites. So let's say you have different teams within your company distributed across different projects, being able to call somebody up and be like, hey, here's this IVM file. Can you jump in here real quick? I wanted to review this with you. Let's say one of your IDs isn't available or one of your design engineers, and you want to just get some quick feedback, architect, structural engineer, that sort of thing. And from the sound of it, that's going to get even easier with more of a seamless approach to jumping in and out of these kind of joint meetings, which I'm looking forward to. So taking that VR, I'm talking whole XR spectrum here, augmented reality for the construction management side of things, I see as being something that's going to evolve into a more powerful tool just because we are on site and we are referencing and locating models over top of the real world. So in the top left there, you can see the beginnings of augmented reality multi-user experiences. And I'm going to say beginnings because I don't think anything is really formed just yet. I mean, there's applications out there, SketchUp Viewer for the HoloLens, very promising first steps, and we're going to see more of that emerging. One of the hardest parts, and I'll kind of just tell you anecdotally, trying to have a design review with multiple HoloLenses in a room creates almost a fiasco kind of scenario where if you're the one running that review, you have a lot of steps ahead of you in terms of getting the model to be represented in all of the headsets in the same location, but then also getting past the hurdle of the headset itself. So the field of view, the product, this thing that people have to put on, it's so distracting that it takes you such a long time to get to the actual meat of the meeting that you're trying to get to that it's almost a detriment in some ways. That also, over time, will get better. On the top, I have an example of an MEP, essentially a quality control walk, doing an entire floor plate of a high-rise building, bringing in just the MEP and some structures that you can actually align to, and then walking with the superintendent or foreman through this space because experientially they understand, the interaction between the environment, the real environment, and the modeled environment. So that they're going to pick up things that maybe you wouldn't even pick up in clash detection, that sort of thing. I walk around and I see the obvious ones where a DAS head is coming through the hologram of a duct, and I'm like, well, they're immediate, you get an immediate visual QC. And again, just more examples on the bottom there. The embed example that you see here, I just want to impress upon anything that you can model, you can now bring into an AR or VR experience. So really you start looking at your processes as a general contractor and how much it costs to go back and put in an embed, or how much it costs to go back and rework this, even if it's small scale. Small things build and add up. If you can send an engineer or a foreman out with the model, or like we do work packages, and lots of general contractors do that where they'll put together specific packages for the workers out in the field. Now we're getting to the point where experiments with having the field personnel have access to augmented reality tools in their pocket, they can bring up that work package, overlay it onto the dirt, overlay it onto the work surface that they're on, and get that immediate, oh crap, I'm at this angle. Oh my goodness, I should be over here. I didn't know this was going to look like this. Or thinking ahead as a schedule-oriented worker, they're going to see things in the future that they need to prepare for now, maybe that they wouldn't have caught in a 2D review. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about the augmented reality side of things, along with the virtual reality. But I think that the XR spectrum, I want to be able to stand out there and flip the switch, right, and go momentarily into a fully immersive back to the augmented. On the top left here, the idea of essentially putting data around the actual job site. So not only augmented reality encompassing, hey, here's this 3D model, look at it, but I'm working on some things right now with kind of like geolocation and that sort of thing where they walk out on site and around this CB, there's actually just data tags that come up and say, this is this point. This is this object. Now, there's definitely an opportunity for any of you out there that are very computer savvy, like start thinking about how to automate these things, like when you bring in your plans, have machine learning, strip out all the details, package those up into something, and then tag them to a location. That way, if that could be streamlined, if somebody could just say upload, and it would upload all details, and somehow they would be in position, I don't know if that'll work. Anyway, just planting some seeds like that there's opportunity if you can manipulate that data. That'd be great from the architectural standpoint, so it's ready to go from the contractor standpoint. The ability to envision, from open floor plates. Open floor plates in a high-rise are pretty much awesome for augmented reality. I mean, you get the real-world structure with the fit-out. On the bottom here is experimentation, again, with work packages and bringing in the 3D model that we're building our 2D sheets from that they're building from actually in the field. And then in the bottom right there, you see overlaying that 3D model that they're building on top of the work area so that they can see known elevations, known slopes, known key points of data floating around there. Along with, I like to include the standard 2D work package sheet kind of floating to the side, which can then be like shut down, manipulating layers. More recently, moving towards a mobile-based AR approach, as that's becoming more prevalent with Google and Apple's AR kit. The ability to basically get out of the $3,000 headset, get out of the $800 headset, and get back to a form factor that everyone knows. Everybody at this point understands how to use apps and applications. It's a pinch or a menu away from understanding. So this is giving a lot of good data at this point, and as it is an early stage, maybe a year from now I'll come back and say how it's progressed. We're in some extended studies with a lot of software partners right now, and it's a pretty exciting time. I want to talk briefly about one of these. I want to talk briefly about this slide here. This is just more of a concept of building up this knowledge base of all of these different XR technologies, all the way from reality capture, scanning, photogrammetry, Revit, Navisworks, whatever modeling you're doing, whatever problem you're coming against, addressing it from a technology standpoint to save you time and headache later on. When you have a very precise thing that has a 90-day lead time from China and it's in millimeters and you've got it modeled in Revit, throw it up on the wall, right? So we take the Revit model, throw that up on the wall, see how it interacts one-to-one scale with that, what's already built in that area, compare it with what's going to happen in that next 90 days. I knew that I had to have something ready to go. We had to put in brackets, 60 days before these panels even get here, low tolerance, but using augmented reality, using simple photogrammetry, just going out there, taking multiple pictures and knowing that it's going to get, within a centimeter of accuracy. It's more of a gut check. Do I feel confident with these numbers that I'm putting on the sheet that I'm handing to the field to go drill into the concrete wall? Ultimately, successful. I was pretty stoked on that one. Within a 30-second, I'm going to call a win. And that's just kind of throwing technology at it. And throwing technology at it that's kind of just at the ready as like this new and emerging tool set, right? So part of this experience of moving from Revit and the 2D based computer simulations, that sort of thing, to an immersive experience is creating a new tool set. Speaking to that, one of the things that I'm personally passionate about is X-ray vision, just in terms of construction. But the ability to have a record or a document of the building that is going to live on with the building, like reimagining deliverables, right? I recently became FAA 107 drone certified, so I've been experimenting, pushing the boundaries of drones. I wanted to get a new vantage point to have a comparison point, because if anyone's worked with point clouds, you understand that you're banging your head against the wall, either it's bogging your computer down, it's not streaming through right, you zoom in, you lose the points, that sort of thing. So kind of an end around for right now while other companies are addressing this issue. Again, I want to stay focused on construction and constructability. Taking photograms, taking drone photography, turning it into 3D models, which you can then, again, with this either mobile AR or the HoloLens, that sort of thing, bringing it back onto site with the ability to look through the slab and at least begin to start eliminating some of the cost of bringing X-ray onto site. Within a certain level of assurance, you can say, when I'm in between these two PT cables, I'm good. Go ahead and core right here. You don't need to basically X-ray every single one and draw out that process. So stay tuned on that one. I think this is something that's going to be evolving, and it has a lot of power. Think pre-cover photos before you close up any wall, before you essentially close up anything. Now, tying this back into VR and kind of coming full circle here, experimenting with bringing that back into VR and utilizing Iris VR's technology here to essentially start reviewing the actual design with the design with the actual PT cabling underneath in the event that a sink needed to go in or some kind of coring needed to go in. This again is more of a concept, and this idea I think is going to evolve and become a powerful tool, and the ability to bring multiple people in here from across states, from across town, and just kind of meet in this. It's going to be very powerful. So just leave you with this image here. I was just recently at MTech Next on MIT campus, where one of the MIT students is working on a virtual reality interface with a robot. And I got to experiment or try this out, and it's pretty wild. You have LiDAR vision, so essentially you see what the robot sees, and you're moving. And it's pretty crazy when you lift a block and you hear, right behind you. It's like, uh-oh. But this more speaks to the idea that, okay, so multi-user VR is maybe introducing us to a more immersive kind of go-to meeting. Now, what about 10 years from now? What if you're logging into a robot on a job site and you're actually going into a confined space? Or what if you're training, an older generation how to operate robots to elongate the life, the working life of some of your key personnel in an industry that has, a real problem coming up. So this is just some of the stuff I'm working on. I hope it was informative. I'm going to pass it over to Scott now.
It's always hard to follow Adam because he shows you the really fun pictures and cool stuff that he gets to do. I get to review shop drawings and concrete and steel. It's super exciting stuff. But I also, like I said before, since I come from the architecture world, I have a little bit of a connection with that side of design and everything. So being able to use that background and then pull it into construction has been a really key element. And I know, like most companies, a lot of architects and ex-architects are all coming over and kind of doing that. Because if you think about it, all of this is about sharing information and about transparency. There's nothing like, nowadays we always hear about how projects are, and there's this iron triangle of owner, contractor, designer, and stuff like that, and somewhere in the middle we build something. So it's about keeping those open communications and sharing information back and forth, so this is just a perfect explanation of, all right, we have really long lead items like that we have to get from all across the world or even locally. How do we efficiently produce all this stuff? So it's just about sharing information. So I'm going to talk to you about a few of our experiences and then also a few case studies. Is one that actually just happened 2 hours ago because I was using it this morning. So so we do a lot of means and methods with this type of stuff, and not necessarily means and methods with the VR side of it, but means and methods for documentation purposes. So everyone that's in the construction or design industry, you kind of know that you create a set of flat drawings for somebody because that's the way it's always been done, and jurisdictions like to see them and everything like that. So, but they're flat, and you hand them off to somebody, they roll up, and they end up in a trash can. So what we're trying to do is use that information in an intuitive way. So you have lots of different audiences that you're presenting to, and a lot of different people that are receiving this information. Sometimes younger generations love the gaming side of things, and they like to jump in and see the 3D side of it. Sometimes the old veteran grizzly bear out in the site refuses to use such information, so you have to pick how you communicate to them. So an example of the one up on the screen is just a very complex column on a project I'm on right now. It's a design feature of the project. At one point, you can actually see on the right there, it looked like we were building a missile silo to basically launch over at Queen Anne area, but we weren't. So for a long time, that was up. But if you think about it, in the end, it's this big, giant design feature. It's just like the column right there. It was slanted, it was sloping in a different direction. It had to basically go 4 floors. Massive element, a lot of design, a lot of rebar, a lot of high-intensity processes that they had to go along. But to physically build that as a contractor, we have a lot of things that we have to put in place to pour that. So formwork became a huge critical element. So as you can see, end product, nothing's around it. Nothing else is supporting it but itself. To build that, we had to basically put this giant formwork on. We actually worked with Perry on this one, and they came from, the designers were from Germany, so we had to do this whole translation thing and everything like that, because of course they designed it in metric. We had to convert it to how we were actually going to build it, so they get my guy out in the field looking at a metric drawing is like, I have no clue what this means. So, so your audience is really important. So we took all that information, and that's a point cloud, a laser scan, and I handed it over to my formwork guy that had to basically support the 4th floor through all these little things. So we basically thread a needle all through that information. So it's not necessarily virtual reality. I guess maybe I can say it's quasi-augmented reality because it's a laser scan and everything like that, and you have different desktop applications that you can zoom around in and look at it. But it was really successful in the sense that we had a static, flat drawing. Upper kind of right of that static drawing is like a 3D view of what the end work would be with a cladding around it, and then I tried to highlight the column in all 3 of them so they kind of knew. But the intent of this was for sequencing, so that we knew that we had to pour up to a certain level, over 40 feet in one direction at this angle, and we had all this formwork in this place, and then at some point, we had to remove all this formwork, how we can get out of it. So some of these next pictures are basically lessons learned and processes. These are 2 export images I created for the headset whenever I was pushing it out. The one on the right was basically for my field guys, and the one on the left was for the designers. So the audience, whenever they came in to look at it, I had to contemplate what exactly I was going to show to them. So this is up in the right-hand corner is actually a bunch of my field guys I worked with. But this is the view of what they were looking at and trying to get an idea of how it was working. And it was really cool because I showed both parties, both images, just to get a reaction. And this is all through the Prospect software and everything like that. But this is actually a screen clip of my computer screen while they were zooming in and out. There's 2 relatively younger gentlemen in there, and the guy that's up there right now, this isn't the exact view at the time, but he was trying to jump off the building and try to figure out how he could do that. I'm like, look at the column, focus on what we're trying to talk about. He wanted to jump off a building and then just like figure out how he could run around the project. Then I gave it to another older guy on my job site. I apologize for aging people and everything like that. I'm old now too, but somebody that wasn't necessarily as comfortable with putting a headset on his face, he still did it and worked with me on it. But he started staring at it as like, oh, I'm going to use this area over here for storing this material, and over here I'm going to stage this. He didn't look at it as if I'm going to play a video game and jump off a building. He looked at it as like where he's physically going to put stuff so that he can do the work that he has to do and work around it. But then the design team comes in, and they take a look at it, and they're like, basically, one of the cool features is they were able to stand there at the bottom, look up, and figure out, oh yeah, I had this in my mind that this is going to be this big feature column, but I never really understood the magnitude of it and how really big it was. And then when he saw all the drawings with me having to put all the formwork around it, they're like, yeah, this is going to be a pain in the butt to build. So good luck. So standing now, so it's a good sign. But anyway, so they came in and they looked at it, and then the next time there was 14 more people that came in with them. They was like, hey, can you show that again? So it was really cool to see that because it was that sharing the information. They didn't necessarily do this in-house, but since we were trying to sequence it, figure it all out, make sure get all of our ducks in a row before we physically build it, it was really successful and really powerful in that scenario. So it's interesting to see how the design side takes it and then the construction side and how we communicate that information back and forth. And this is what I literally was doing this morning, 2 hours probably before I even walked out the door to get here, as I was reviewing a shop drawing for steel. Currently on the project, I'm not only just an IDE and I play with models and use that experience, I'm also responsible, I'm the project engineer for all the concrete and all the structural steel on the building. So I'm managing all that stuff and then working with our teams to get the information out to the field and making sure they got everything they need. So this morning, I was reviewing a shop drawing for the penthouse. Everyone knows how much fun that is. Usually it's the top of the building, usually it's complex, and it's the stuff that people think about last. So in the upper right one that's kind of got the red circle around it, basically I knew there's a ship's ladder coming down and there's nothing supporting that ship's ladder. So I'm in the process of procuring and ordering all this steel that, of course, has to be here in like 2 weeks, which is not going to be fun. But I have to basically reach out to the design team and be like, hey, there's missing design here and missing steel. I need to get it on site. What kind of available options do I have that could be some fast source items I can get onto the job site? So not a long lead item, something super simple. Don't get crazy with the design, but know that we have to support something. So this was this morning for me, just literally putting on a headset, walking around the job site virtually and seeing that there's a little bit of discrepancy between my model and then also the sub model that I'm bringing in. And that model, by the way, too, since we're kind of a Revit users group, theirs is done in Tekla, brought in different ways. So you're using different mediums. You have a toolbox with a bunch of different information coming in from different points, and it's how you combine it all and make it simple. The nice thing is about the push button and just how it goes out. That's why we've been really happy in working with this IRIS software and how it goes out to prospect. And we're actually, I think Shane's going to come up and kind of give you a little bit more of a demo on it. So, but another good example too, since I just remembered one of the case studies I was doing is kind of what Adam was talking about, like how we get out and we do virtual inspections. We use this too for, a lot of people know that when you see something virtually, it kind of triggers memory and that you can remember it when you go out there in the future. So we'll do a virtual engineer record walk even before we do my record walk with the engineer to sign off on things. And that way I get an idea of what everything's supposed to be, if it's in the right place. So I'm walking out there, I can have a few key points to look at. So it's been very successful. It's still in its infancy stages. We're still developing and figuring out how it's going to be used, but it's got lots of potential. So hopefully you got something from this. So I'll stay up here with you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, great. Thanks, Scott. Great. So we'll do a little bit of a live demo too. Because Scott's a heavy user of ours, he's going to hop in with some tips and tricks along the way. I'll start with a few more slides from this great slide. So the tool that we've been building is called Prospect, and the whole focus of it from day one has sort of been how do we make the pipeline from Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, now Navisworks, into VR really simple and easy. And we focused on these core formats. We just released Navisworks 2 days ago, so we're getting feedback from that now as we speak, as users start using it. But the core idea being, like, let's make this as streamlined as possible. So if anyone's familiar with the custom VR workflow, it's very laborious. You have to go into a game engine. It's either Unity or Unreal Engine. There's a lot of value to doing that, but you're gonna be putting in hundreds of hours. At least to start. It's not like a 3D modeling program that we're used to. It's a very different type of program, and the work involved is a lot of dealing with like mesh compression and how you actually create a real-time environment. So we saw that. We wanted to build something that was a little more streamlined. How do we make it easy? How do we preserve all the awesome BIM data that's already in, well, sometimes awesome BIM data that's already in Revit? And how do we bring that into an environment where you can still access sort of all of the natural elements of your model and all of the data within your model, and then how do we make that sort of meeting ready? So these are 3 videos. We're not going to do the live VR part of the demo until afterwards. You guys can come up and try it. just because we're screen recording and we're showing the slides. So I took some videos of what the in VR experience looks like, and I'll show you guys some of these use cases in video. We'll show some of the live workflow, and then we'll get into the actual headset stuff after the talk. So this is multi-user. You can see there's 5 people in this session. This works with people joining from anywhere in the world. They can put on the headsets, and then all these goggles have headphones and a mic. So you are essentially in like a multiplayer game, but you're inside your Revit model. And you can, what's cool about all this gaming tech is it is synced across the server. So if someone highlights something, or if someone selects something, or someone changes the time of day, that's seen by everyone. So it really is like this shared web environment where if you draw an arrow, everyone in the session sees that arrow. And that creates a pretty interesting platform for both like having a good conversation around the project, but then also being able to actually do some work in there and mark it up. What we just released a couple days ago was the ability for the host to mute everyone, because what we found is once people put the headsets on, they get really excited, and then you have like 6 people talking all at once. So yeah, now there's some host controls to guide people through the session, and also like gather people, because typically the more important the person, the more likely they are to like wander off. So there's now some like host controls to gather people. Exactly. And then in like the single player side, we focus on a couple different workflows. Immersive design review, like I mentioned before. This is showing just some of the features in VR once you've loaded in your file. This one's a SketchUp file. I don't even know if I can say SketchUp at a Revit user group, sorry. I know. Pretend it's a Revit file. So this is a scale model mode where you can essentially rotate the model and look at it at scale. And then you saw with VR, you can teleport into it, look around. We do have geolocation in the model, so the sun position is accurate. You'll be able to do accurate sun studies. And then we also sort of have this like free roam capability because it is in a real-time game engine, so you can move around freely. That teleport option is really for comfort, because in VR, if you're standing still in real life, you kind of always want to feel stationary in VR. So that's why we do the teleport. And you can see there I just turned on a layer. So this is pulling over the layers from the 3D model, as well as like the 3D views. So if you set up some views in Revit, it'll pull in those views, and you can use those to go between different parts of your model. So a lot of these workflows we're starting to think about, like there's the personal workflows of doing your own immersive review, but then there's also, like, let's say you have a client in there, you could also guide them through those different saved views if you wanted to sort of curate more of a narrative and let them move around. And then here's a coordination model. I just use the Revit sample model because if you import the structural, the MEP, and the architectural, none of the models align, so it's great for showing clashes. So this is the sample model. We're cutting a section in it, and then I start walking through and sort of flagging issues that I see in the model. And this is also, a lot of the work we've been doing is, like, once you're in VR, how do you really make it like a native VR experience where you can really get the benefits of having a fully tracked space and fully tracked hands, and like what is sort of the natural way to move around. So I'm turning on outlines here, and then I saw right away that two of the linked models had the staircase. So I'm gonna select some of these different items and start inspecting them, and then flagging the issues that I'm catching. So this is essentially letting me highlight the different elements in the model, and then anything that becomes an issue, I can select it, go in, and then flag it. What that creates is essentially a list of issues that I found in my model, and gives me an export afterwards, so I can start catching things. And then up here, I'm also seeing sort of with each of these selected elements, what layer they're on. I'm able to turn them on and off and sort of look at what's causing what clashes, and to be able to figure out sort of where in the modeling process what went wrong, or where there's might be further issues. I think I get really excited here because I found a really big error and I started moving my head around. But yeah, there's a MEP going through the wall there. And then there's a very clear one where the structural grid's misaligned. So this is using essentially some VR callouts, being able to stamp it just with sort of like a marker stamp, and then take a picture of it so I can save that to my desktop and send that over to folks that need it. And then this is some samples of like the outputs we have right now, because what we found is we put a lot of time into building the VR interface, and then at a certain point we got a lot of feedback from users saying like, this is great, but like now we got to get out of VR, we got to send this to people, we got to like put this into our sort of meeting notes. And this is a lot of what we're working on these days at Iris, is we have this sort of output here for a CSV export, we have the screenshots, and then moving forward, a lot of the rest of this year, we're focused on how do you take notes in VR, how do you get that out of VR, and then sort of how do you start creating a punch list, issue tracking, all of that now that you're able to do work in VR. So that's been sort of an ongoing campaign for us more recently. And so those are some of the in-VR elements. I think to sort of bring this home a little bit, to show you guys can use this, I'll show the product today. And I'll show you the full screen version because I don't have the headset set up here, and you guys can see the workflow. So what we do is we have a desktop app. So this is Prospect installed on my machine. And when you install this, it puts this desktop app here, but then it also installs plugins into each of the modeling formats. So if you have Navisworks or Rhino or Revit on your machine, it'll put a plugin into the add-ins tab that says View in VR. So I'll have a scene set up, that, like a 3D view setup that I want to load, and then I'll click View in VR, and then I pick that selected 3D view. And we made a decision pretty early on to just load the geometry from within that 3D view, especially if you guys have like really huge files. We try to load the big ones as best as we can, but there are always bigger files, and at some point they will bog down the machine. A good rule of thumb is if it doesn't run on your machine, it won't run in VR on your machine. We get that question a lot. Yep. And so I'll select the 3D view here, and at this point we're essentially extracting this file out into a VR-ready format. So this is on our end under the hood essentially doing a lot of the mesh compression and optimization to pull it into a real-time environment. And then you can see it's pretty fast. So at this point now it's in this library within our ecosystem for VR. It pulled out all the 3D perspective cameras that you have in your scene. And then if I click View in VR, it will try to launch in VR. It's going to see that I have nothing hooked up, so it's going to switch over to a desktop mode. So if you guys are in a meeting, yeah, it's yelling at me because I don't have VR in, but if you guys are in like a meeting where one person's in the headset and there's a few other people that don't have headsets, they can join from a screen-based view. So what this essentially gives you is the ability to double-click wherever you want to go. You see that you get this little teleportation target showing you where you'll land. You can also, like, if you click on a ceiling, it'll put you on the floor below that ceiling. And what this essentially gives you is a lightweight version outside of VR. And the thing I wanted to point out here is whether you're in VR or not, you do get some full screen options. So even if you have a client in VR, you can open up this full screen menu down here and say like, okay, client, now we're going to go to the living room. And it'll teleport you and the person in VR to that saved camera view you have. And et cetera, with the views. And then you also, from the screen, can control things like sun position. It is a real-time engine, so it's pretty snappy in terms of like interactivity. And you can also control your layers. So let's turn off a layer. That's sort of obvious. How about Andrew? There you go. So you can control the categories and the layers from within the product. And then when you close this, you'll essentially have your library file here saved. And then if you want to create a meeting, what these guys were talking about with the ability to schedule meetings, you can go to essentially this options tab here, click on the file, and then say create meeting from file. And what that will do is it'll let you sort of create a meeting name, select the project that you've loaded. And right now, what that produces is a shareable meeting file. It's literally we call it a .ivm, and then you can distribute that to anyone who wants to try it. The last piece of this is all, I'm on sort of a user account here. If you send it to someone who doesn't have an account, we do have a viewer as well. So if they double click on that meeting file and they don't have any information, they'll be able to launch into a viewer and then just join that meeting from there. So we're sort of modeling that after like GoToMeeting or Zoom, where if someone with the account can schedule a meeting, then anyone else can come in and join.
If anyone hasn't used that yet, it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. Adam was showing some photos of how we're across the city at different job sites, different bandwidths, different strengths of internet, and I can sit there and wave at them, wave back at them, we draw little faces around each other. It's kind of fun. But that's when you start playing the game stuff.
Right, exactly. A lot of tic-tac-toe happening in VR right now with the annotation tools, but
Each person can make their own annotations and take photos, and at the very end, it's all in that screen. I'm going to show you too, so it's actually an executed implementation.
And we've been finding that too with multi-user and sort of the collaboration element. It is in terms of like VR adoption, I think a lot of the questions we get these days is like, well, how much is VR being adopted in the industry, and are you guys seeing it accelerate? I think that collaboration is really a big key to that, is the more that you can be in, like if you guys have given VR demos before, you've tried VR, a lot of times it's like you in a room with this many people watching as like you put on the goggles, and it's like, it's really a sort of an uncomfortable experience if there's just one person in the headset and everyone else watching. And so like as the headsets get lighter and as multi-user is more possible, having more people shared in the immersive environment together, it drives a lot better conversation, but it also just like makes all the participants more comfortable and can lead to like much better conversations because there's more people participating in the immersive world together. Great, and then Scott, I can drive around if you want, or you can drive, but you had a ton of good advice for getting started with these tools, so I'll make this full screen.
We're in a Revit user group, so anyone that jumps in, I just give you a few. Oh yeah, sorry. I'll give you a few just quick tips. I mean, like not only is it just fun just to get in there and use it and try to just experiment it and see how it works, but know that who your audience is. I've said that a couple times now. I think that's fourth or fifth down on that line, but that's really a big one. But knowing your audience also means that you have to have all your equipment really accessible. In the very beginning, was hiding mine because I was like, oh, I have this cool new toy that nobody else should be able to touch, and they can't know I have it here. So I was hiding it underneath my desk, but that was an extra step. That was an extra 10 minutes or something like that I had to take out physically, put it up on a screen, take all the devices out, put them there. So now they're just hanging smack on my wall, just ready to go. So I just hit it, and with this one click button, you're just moving. So time is, like I always say, time is money. So people's time is precious. So keeping it dirty and simple is sometimes better than doing these glamorous views and trying to really wow people. Like for what I'm using it for constructability, they don't necessarily care about the finishes and stuff like that. They just want to see how they're going to get in there and do it and how it's going to affect their life at that moment. So keeping the views simple is really key too. I'm also in a lot of mega large projects, so simple is key. I know the sample you just showed is like of a whole house. Yes, that you could do that, but for mine, I'm doing it by level and then creating views or the viewpoints, and that's my agenda items on the list that I want to go through, and I'm kind of using that as my meeting minutes in some way, saying, okay, everyone, we're going to look at this, 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 and this, and then once we're done, you guys can run around and see what you want to see. So, because like I said, people want to jump off buildings. So, but knowing your audience, that's a really good one. Utilize view templates. Have a couple of those set up already, so play with it ahead of time. Depending on different people you're going to be showing it to. So you can use those really quickly. They set it up for you. Because a lot of times you just literally hit 3D view, and then you're like, okay, I have to do all this stuff with work sets and all, and it just takes time to get through all your visibility graphics. So do it fast. And then make sure in the beginning you're properly modeling and also continuously inspecting your model. So as a contractor, we model a little bit different than I did in the architecture world and everything like that. So, but as early as you can get in there and build it as actually it is going to be built, the better, and then inherently putting in that metadata, because there's new information and stuff coming out and everything like that on how you can select elements, and you can get references for it. One big trick now that everyone probably complains about when I'm doing the VR stuff is, especially my field, is where's the grid line? Where's my level? And you're like, yes, that virtually doesn't show up. Everyone knows how much fun that is. But a trick is select your column. It's embedded in there, so you can get a quick reference and be like, oh, if you select that column right there, I know it's at J2. So use your metadata as you can. Utilize those meetings. Those meetings are super powerful. You can do it across disciplines, across the country, across the world. I mean, they're super simple and they're easy to share. So take advantage of it, and don't be afraid to break it. That's probably one of my best advice for you is, it's kind of fun to get out there and push it, but then you get to send information back and say, hey, I was doing this, I really wanted to do this, but it crapped out on me, so I couldn't finish it. So got to work in there and try to do that stuff. So yeah.
Great, so the last piece here is just a lot of how we're building this into the future, and we've talked about this a bit, but like comfort is everything. A lot of people have tried really nauseating VR experiences. The good news is like the headsets now are at a place where they will not make you sick if they're set up properly. A lot of that is both having a decent gaming graphics card on your machine. The good news is they're cheaper than workstation machines. I apologize to NVIDIA for continuing to say this to everyone, but you can get a pretty cheap computer, a pretty cheap high-end computer compared to the workstation machines. So like both these machines that we have up here, they're pretty thin laptops, and they're running essentially the best graphics cards you can get for VR right now. That will hit the right frame rates. And if you guys are thinking about getting more VR set up for your office, like we spend a lot of time talking about hardware, so you can shoot me an email or shoot anyone on our team an email, and we'll give you a lot of opinions on what to get and what's currently sort of the best setup. And we're always working on getting more data in. Like in the release coming up, we're working on getting sort of custom fields in from your families if you're putting in like budget information or any other custom information. So the more that we can make this data rich, we think that that will really facilitate full sort of true in VR workflows. And you can try trials. We're set up specifically to make it as easy as possible to get going with you guys. So the software is called Prospect, and you guys can download it from our website, and we're happy to answer questions along the way as you guys try it out. And I think, there you go. So with that, I think I'll pass it off, and thank you guys so much for the attention, and hopefully that was very helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, why don't we do this, since we have the live demo. I know that there were some hands that went up earlier as far as how many people have used VR experiences and things like that. So because we have a pretty big group, and to respect everybody's time, if you've seen VR, if you've done VR, why don't you let the people that haven't, they have interest, kind of have first crack at it. I'm going to wrap up the meeting so that we can linger around here and try it, and people can leave as they need. All right, well, we're going to open it up to the demos, but before we do that, I do have to make an announcement, and I wanted to save it for the very end because nobody wants to follow this. I have to very sadly convey to everybody here a bit of bad news. Last month we lost our good friend and colleague Alfredo Africa. A lot of you that have been a fixture here at SeaRUG knew Alfredo, and it wouldn't feel right to not say anything because Alfredo did a lot of the heavy lifting early on in the days of SeaRUG, was responsible for our original website, and bear with me. He brought me onto the board, and he's just, if you knew him, you knew that he had a great smile and an infectious laugh, and late last month he suffered a heart attack that he would not recover from. So do me a favor. When you go home tonight, give your loved ones a little bit extra hug. If you have a 14-year-old daughter and starting high school like I do, try to embarrass her a little bit and just kind of be aware that it's all fleeting and we don't have long, and try to enjoy as much as you can. So here's to Alfredo, and thank you very much for joining us.